The history of the Earth begins 4.6 billion years ago. At that time, everything was different from what we know today. In the beginning, the Earth seemed strange and unknown, and yet it will become so welcoming that it will allow life to develop and humans to settle there permanently. How was the world around us formed? How did it evolve to become the Earth as we know it today? Dear traveler, good morning. Through 4 videos, we embark on an exceptional journey, retracing the history of the Earth since its birth, to dive back into the heart of our planet, at the beginning of its formation, and throughout its evolution. Today we start the second chapter. Previously, we have related its adventure from its accretion until 3 billion years ago. You will continue this journey until 485 million years ago. Every planet has a history. This is the history of the Earth. But before you go, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and have a nice trip. The Pongola Glaciation is the first ice age in Earth's history, beginning 2.9 billion years ago. An ice age is characterized by the existence of at least one ice sheet and is associated with a significant lowering of the global average ocean level. An ice sheet is a continental ice cap formed from snow precipitation, covering at least 50,000 square kilometers, or 20,000 square miles, over a maximum thickness of a few kilometers or a few miles. Ice ages are related to plate tectonics. When one or more continents drift to polar conditions, snow accumulates in summer. The orogeny, that is to say, the formation of reliefs, favors the appearance of new fractured rocks in the open air, which can be brought to undergo strong alterations and, consequently, a great consumption of CO2 from the atmosphere, leading to a decrease of the greenhouse effect and the temperature at the surface of the planet. The increase of the albedo, or reflective power of the Earth, generates a runaway phenomenon of glaciation, and once half of the surface of the Earth begins to be frozen in white, nothing can counter a total freeze. This phenomenon leads the Earth to a snowball appearance. $2.7 billion years ago, the formation of a new supercontinent begins, Kenorland. It includes the future parts of Laurentia, Baltica, Western Australia, and Kalahari. A few million years earlier, magmatic outpourings under the ocean begin and reach their highest peak with an eruption of cometites. Volcanic arcs are accompanied by upwelling of rocks from the mantle, followed by orogenic deformation, installation of granitoids, stabilization of the lithosphere, and finally, collision with other cratons. It is by accumulating all these phenomena that the supercontinent Kenorland takes shape above the sea level. $2.5 billion years ago, the phenomenon of plate tectonics will take a turning point in the history of the Earth's geology. Until then, 2 types of plate movement were operating, horizontal and vertical. The latter is explained by subduction, a geological phenomenon that occurs when rocks have different densities. A massive unit, such as ultrabasic lavas of the cometite type, is placed on a less dense unit, such as the crust and literally sinks into the latter, involving a movement contrary to diaperism. As a result, less dense rocks move up the sides of the inverted diaper. The sagduction creates depressions in the middle of the plates and contributes to the accumulation of sedimentary deposits. At this time, the composition of the mantle evolves and the formation of comatites slows down. The density of the basaltic masses being too low to provoke sagduction, vertical tectonics ends, and only horizontal tectonics will last until our time. A heavy and unbreathable atmosphere reigns on the Earth. The planet is in a transition phase during which the methane-producing microorganisms give way to photosynthetic organisms and release oxygen in large proportions. The Earth looks like Saturn's moon, Titan, under a thick orange fog. The intense activity of cyanobacteria releases a large amount of oxygen into the seawater, which then reaches the atmosphere. The chemical evolution of the latter is certainly a major event, but the ecological crisis that follows marks the history of the Earth. The Great Oxidation is similar to a mass extinction that kills most of the organisms existing at the time, for which oxygen was then toxic. Living things build structures based on carbon, or on carbon compounds with a nitrogen group. In both situations, this refers to assemblies of carbon atoms. Organisms that contribute to oxygenation draw their carbon from the CO2 molecules in the atmosphere, and their energy from sunlight. When a reaction of fixation of a carbon atom occurs, it releases a molecule of dioxygen. For cyanobacteria, oxygen is therefore only a toxic waste product. Cyanobacteria, through photosynthesis, release a large amount of oxygen into their environment, which then reaches the atmosphere. The oxygen reacts first with the compounds present on the surface, such as methane, salt, and iron minerals. Then, the latter being at saturation, it begins to accumulate in the atmosphere. The oxygen thus released is a poison for the living organisms present at the time, since they are anaerobic organisms. Many organisms existing on Earth are killed. The survivors, in a first time, develop mechanisms to protect themselves from oxygen. Then, in a second time, the organisms evolve into aerobic organisms. Today, they are the majority, since oxygen has become essential. The increase in oxygen concentration provides a new opportunity for biological diversification and changes in the chemical interactions of rocks, sand, clay, and other geological substrates. Without the widespread availability of oxygen, life was previously limited. The energy available to living organisms is now increasing. As early as 2.4 billion years ago, the Earth enters what will remain one of the longest ice ages in its history. The Huronian glaciation owes its name to sedimentary formations of glacial origin found in North America in the Lake Huron region. The entire surface of the Earth is covered with ice. This sudden change in the climate of the planet is closely linked to the evolution of the composition of the atmosphere that occurred at this time. With the appearance of life and the processes of photosynthesis, prokaryotic bacteria release oxygen in large quantities. This oxygen is able to oxidize the methane in the atmosphere, which reduces its concentration. Methane being a powerful greenhouse gas, its decrease triggers a drop in temperature. At the same time, the CO2 is trapped in the limestones in formation, and its proportion in the atmosphere decreases. The decrease in greenhouse gases causes a global cooling, followed by a succession of ice ages. 2.4 billion years ago, the sun is 20% less powerful than today, which contributes to the sharp decrease in temperature. It is up to minus 50 degrees Celsius, or minus 52 degrees Fahrenheit, for several tens of thousands of years. The water is frozen. The albedo increases as the icy white areas reflect much more. Cooling and freezing increase. In the heart of the Earth, activity is in full swing. The volcanoes emit CO2, which is stored under the ice. At the slightest opportunity, it is released into the atmosphere, suddenly intensifying the greenhouse effect. Temperatures then rise to the surface. A deglaciation occurs in a few tens of thousands of years. During 300 million years, the processes of glaciation and deglaciation will occur 4 times. Volcanism continues to produce carbon dioxide in significant quantities, and it slowly accumulates in the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect becomes sufficient to warm the planet and melt the ice. The decrease of the albedo accelerates the process, leading abruptly to the passage from an ice age to a tropical climate. At the end of this Huronian glaciation, the retreat of the glaciers triggers a massive erosion that disintegrates the silicates, absorbs the excess CO2, and precipitates it into the oceans in the form of silicates. The continents are denuded, but the decrease in CO2 weakens the greenhouse effect and allows a return to more moderate temperatures. The erosion phenomenon tends to bring the continental crust back to zero level. Everything that is in relief above sea level is eroded, and alluvium is deposited in the marine environment, contributing to sedimentary deposits. Conversely, everything below sea level gradually settles until it rises again. As a result of the accumulation of cratons over larger and larger land masses, the oceans become deeper. Iron, in the form of ferrous ions, is present in the primitive oceans in soluble form and green in color. With the appearance of the first organisms, photosynthesis, and the production of oxygen, the composition of the ocean evolves, and so does the form of oceanic iron. Ferrous iron oxidizes into red ferric iron. In this form, iron is no longer soluble in water. It precipitates and falls to the bottom of the oceans, accumulating in the form of sediment until it becomes rock. During periods of glaciation, which are not very favorable to the development of organisms, the production of oxygen slows down, or even stops. The rock is then adorned with a less red layer, with a ribbon-like appearance, rather gray or greenish. The iron having now precipitated, it does not disturb the ocean, which becomes much clearer. The sunlight penetrates more intensely, and photosynthesis takes place at greater depths. Organisms of a new type appear. Coccoid bacteria taking the form of spherules surrounded by a shell, a kind of plankton living on photosynthesis, called Phytoplankton. Taking advantage of a moderate climate, this type of plankton, autotrophic towards carbon, develops at its ease. It gets its energy by photosynthesis. Too small to be visible to the naked eye, it can appear on the surface of the water as a colored expanse if its organisms are present in sufficient quantity. Phytoplankton is a primary producer, since its function is to transform inorganic matter, such as CO2, mineral salts, light or water, into organic matter that will be used by other living organisms. Under the influence of plate tectonics, a supercontinent slowly takes shape 2.2 billion years ago. Columbia, also known as Nuna. This supercontinent was welded together during a long period of orogeny and collisions over 4 million years. It includes most of the Earth's landmass and is estimated to extend 12,900 kilometers or 8,000 miles from north to south, and 4,800 kilometers or 3,000 miles at its widest. Until 1.8 billion years ago, the continental blocks move until they reach their final position. The eastern coast of India is attached to western North America. South Australia is welded to western Canada. The cratonic blocks of South America and West Africa are welded first during the Trans-Amazonian and Hibernian orogenies. 2 million years later, the Capfall and Zimbabwe blocks collided along the Limpopo belt. 1 million years later, the final assembly takes place. The North American Craton suture, the Kola, Karelia, Volgo-Uralia, and Sarmatia cratons join to form Baltica, a paleocontinent. The Anabar and Aldan cratons connect. The North and South Indian blocks join. And finally, the East and West blocks of the China Craton weld together. Columbia remains a supercontinent until 1.6 billion years ago, when it begins its fragmentation. The oxygen now available becomes a new source of energy, much more efficient than fermentation. The world of living things evolves and becomes more complex. Bacteria learn to use this element, and respiration appears. Oxygen is particularly reactive and allows a better catabolism than in anaerobic conditions. Is it at this moment that cells with a nucleus appear? The subject is still much debated. The oldest microfossil, indisputably eukaryotic, is dated 1.45 billion years, but recent discoveries have revealed traces of multicellular life that would date back to 2.1 billion years ago. This discovery has not been refuted, but some scientists dispute its interpretation. We will place their appearance here in our chronology. The development of new forms of cells is becoming more and more widespread. These are the eukaryotic cells. The term eukaryote covers all unicellular or multicellular organisms that have a nucleus and organelles such as an endoplasmic reticulum, plastids, and mitochondria. The whole is delimited by membranes. In contrast, prokaryotic cells lack these components. Another element that differentiates eukaryotes and prokaryotes is the structure of their DNA strands. The genetic material of eukaryotes is located in the nucleus in the form of linear strands that are compressed during cell division, the chromosomes. Prokaryotic cells, on the other hand, have only one circular chromosome that forms a loop. Eukaryotic cells are larger, on average 1,000 times larger. The first fossil traces are actriarchs, spherical organic vesicles measuring from 20 to 100 micrometers. These eukaryotes most certainly originated from bacteria and archaea but the process that led to this evolution is still a mystery. Biologists assume that cell compartmentalization would have appeared as a result of capture and fusion mechanisms between prokaryotes and would have resulted in the formation of a eukaryotic cell. This is why eukaryotic cells are larger than bacteria. In 2008, a profusion of centimetric fossils similar to multi-cell eukaryotic organisms were found in Gabon, near Franceville, while the scientific community thought that this form of life had appeared much later. Black clays from the Franceville Basin, which has not been tectonically deformed or metamorphically affected, have revealed fossils of multicellular organisms. Within rocks belonging to a group of 5 harmoniously stacked formations, nearly 400 fossils were discovered in the black clay layers. These fossils measure from 7 to 120 millimeters in length, from 5 to 70 millimeters in width, and 1 to 10 millimeters in thickness. They can take the form of circular aggregates, pyritized or not. In spite of their flat representation, colonial pluricellular organisms are differentiated from bacterial mats by the presence of steranes, which occur during the transformation of sterols during diagenesis. Sterols are properly related to the biosynthesis of eukaryotes. The presence of these eukaryotes corresponds to a time when the oxygen content was still low, between 0.1 and 1% of the current concentration of the atmosphere. Researchers believe that these are assemblies of cells that communicated with each other and were capable of coordinated movements. At this time, 2.1 billion years ago, multicellular organisms were not at their peak, but they were making a quiet entrance into the world of life. They will spread and diversify more widely a little later. The appearance of eukaryotic cells is jointly linked to the appearance of compartmentalization within the cells themselves. It is expressed by the presence inside the cell of various organelles and a nucleus that imprisons the genetic material. 2 billion years ago, the endosymbiosis of a protobacterium would have allowed the appearance of a particular organelle, the mitochondrion. During their evolution, cells meet and interactions occur. Some cells absorb other cells. If digestion does not occur, the ingested organism reproduces within the host cell. Over time, the bacterium no longer has autonomy and becomes an organelle. Endosymbiosis is defined by this type of association when one of the partners lives inside the other and provides a benefit to all the cells. Anaerobic cells with a nucleus would have ingested bacteria capable of transforming the energy of certain molecules into energy that can be used for other reactions. Some of these absorbed bacteria become machines, allowing the production of energy for the cells, the mitochondria. These are the respiratory and energy centers of the cells. From 1.8 billion years ago, and for a period of 1 billion years, the Earth is in a period of relative calm. Its tectonic activity is stable, as is its atmospheric environment. Biological evolution is slow due to low oxygen levels. No glaciations have been recorded, no major catastrophes, no major innovations. This period is called the Boring Period, and translated by the Boring Billion. This appellation can be considered as unfair, since the planet will undergo significant events in the billion years that will follow. This period would have been marked by a particular oceanic regime based on chemistry, designated by the expression of intermediate ocean, or Canfield Ocean, named after the scientist who postulated the existence of this ocean. During the Great Oxidation, the oxygen produced oxidizes certain chemical elements present in the ocean, such as iron, but it is not present in sufficient quantity to oxygenate the entire aquatic environment. In parallel, the alteration and oxidation of continental rocks are accentuated by the formation of supercontinents and the oxygenation of the atmosphere. Sulfate ions are then introduced in mass into the oceans. The waters of the planet during 1 billion years are enriched in sulfur, but contain almost no iron and very little oxygen. This new composition will have two effects on marine microbial organisms. On the one hand, bacteria that are highly dependent on sulfur will proliferate, such as purple and green sulfur bacteria and sulfate-reducing bacteria. On the other hand, living organisms have difficulty synthesizing the ammonia they need, because this synthesis is intimately linked to an enzyme containing iron, of which the Canfield Ocean has little. Their development is consequently slowed down. A continental rift forms 1.6 billion years ago. It extends along the western margin of Laurentia, eastern India, the southern margin of Baltica, the northwestern margin of South Africa, and the northern margin of the North China Block. Strong magmatic activity accompanied this upheaval. The total fragmentation of the continent was spread over 300 to 400 million years. The great story of the cells continues. 500 million years after the cells were equipped with organelles allowing the production of energy, a new organelle essential in the functioning of the plant cells will make its appearance: the chloroplast. Like mitochondria, chloroplasts are the result of endosymbiosis and capture the light that causes photosynthesis. It is by feeding on external elements that cells with a nucleus ingest certain photosynthetic bacteria, and that arrangements intervene at the level of the symbiotic partners. Cyanobacteria are photosynthetic microorganisms that can capture light thanks to pigments, and are able to synthesize their own organic matter. Gene transfers take place between the nucleus cell and the ingested bacterium. The resulting cell consists of the genetic material of its nucleus, that of its mitochondria, and that of the new elements. It becomes a self-sufficient cell. Until then, organisms reproduce by simple division. From one generation to another, they remain almost identical to themselves. The biosphere will evolve considerably with the appearance of a new mode of reproduction: sexual reproduction. It is a great step in the evolution of the living. This complex form of sexuality is called meiosis. A normal cell containing two sets of chromosomes divides into specialized cells whose nuclei contain only one set of chromosomes. Each cell must then find a complementary partner to fuse and reconstitute a cell that will then have all the chromosomes. Fertilization consists of the fusion of the male and female sex cells, and thus the reunion of two sets of chromosomes. Such a mixing of genes will generate an enormous diversity of individuals and the appearance of new species. Plate tectonics continues to turn the continents upside down. 1.1 billion years ago, under its influence, the continental masses regrouped and formed Rodinia. The eastern coast of the current United States is close to the western coast of the current South America, and our current Antarctica and Australia are adjacent to the west coast of the United States. A planet that looked very different from what we see today. The supercontinent Rodinia is surrounded by the ocean, Merovia. It extends from 60 degrees north latitude to the South Pole. Inside its seam zones, Rodinia has a huge rust-colored plain on which sands accumulate. The surface of the Earth is completely deserted. The life remains confined to the aquatic environment, since the atmosphere contains only 5% of the concentration of oxygen that we know today. Situation which does not allow the development of the layer of ozone, which protects the surface of the Earth of the ultraviolet rays. The surface temperature is estimated at an average of 10 degrees Celsius, or almost 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun is 6% weaker than today, and its rays are not as powerful. A day lasts at that time less than 22 hours, and a year has 13 months. The formation of a supercontinent like Rodinia acts like a lid on the planet. This cover evacuates the heat from the Earth only by the phenomenon of conduction, which is not very efficient. The heat that is not evacuated accumulates and causes the temperature of the upper mantle and the lower crust to rise. The central parts of the continent become hotter. As a result, the density of the rocks decreases. They rise to the surface and form huge domes. The crust is stretched and becomes thinner. Cracks appear, from which magmatic rocks in fusion pour out. The volcanic activity intensifies. A superdome formed 850 million years ago cracks 1 million years later. Lava takes place in the trenches created. As they move apart, water invades the trenches, and new oceans are formed. New conditions were created that would allow life to find refuge from the harsh events it would endure over the next few million years. About 750 million years ago, Rodinia broke up. At that time, the supercontinent is centered on the equator. Subjected to the effect of hotspots, the Earth's crust is crossed by enormous quantities of lava that pierce it like spears. Oceans and inlets open up, increasing the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. Heavy rains fall on the Earth and subject the fractured continental rocks to a strong alteration. This phenomenon consumes a lot of CO2. The size of the coastline grows. Marine and coastal organisms proliferate, using massive amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Lava flows caused by the breakup of the supercontinent form basaltic surfaces on the surface of continental blocks. Under the effect of humidity, these basaltic surfaces erode and consume large quantities of CO2. Deprived little by little of carbon dioxide, the greenhouse effect is reduced. The Earth appears calm. The oceanic ripples are not very active, but the average temperature at the surface of the planet decreases considerably, to the point that freeze-ups occur. The Earth becomes snowball again. The ground temperature averages between minus 40 degrees Celsius and minus 50 degrees Celsius, i.e., between minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit and minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. When night falls, it drops to between minus 80 degrees Celsius and minus 100 degrees Celsius. That is, between minus 112 degrees Fahrenheit and minus 148 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun is about 6% less powerful than today. It shines less intensely and produces less energy. Its luminosity is low. A climate of desolation reigns on the Earth. The air is dry and cold, unbreathable because of its low oxygen content. No more liquid water circulates, except at the base of the glaciers, which puts the water cycle at risk. the freeze-ups follow one another and get out of control in a real vicious circle. The icy surfaces get bigger and reflect more and more sunlight into space. This is the famous albedo effect. The temperature at the surface of the Earth decreases even more. The thickness of the ocean ice reaches more than 1 kilometer. Like a large pearly mattress, the ice nevertheless leaves gigantic crevices in some places in which organisms are resisting. The fauna and flora undergo extreme conditions, but also find refuge at the bottom of the oceans within a thin strip of ice-free water that has been able to survive thanks to the extraordinary properties of water. As water cools, its density increases, and below 4 degrees Celsius, or 39 degrees Fahrenheit, its volume also increases, even after it freezes. During the Ice Age, the water begins to cool at the surface. It becomes denser, and a current is created. The cold water flows and homogenizes the temperature over the entire depth. As soon as the temperature drops below 4 degrees Celsius, or 39 degrees Fahrenheit, the surface water becomes less dense and remains at the surface. This is how the ice form creates the thermal shield that prevents the seafloor from freezing and allows organisms to survive. The Varanger glaciation would have benefited the diversification of life, according to some research. At the end of the glaciation, when the ice melts, the erosion of the continents leads to the release of large quantities of phosphorus. This phosphorus is dissolved in the oceans and encourages the proliferation of phytoplankton. Oxygen is released into the atmosphere, which facilitates the appearance of new organisms. As in most ice ages, the Earth's core remains active throughout the Varanger glaciation. Emissions of CO2-rich volcanic gases do not stop, so after 1 million years, the Earth's thick ice cover begins to melt. Greenhouse gases take their place in the atmosphere, since nothing else transforms them. There is no more alteration of rocks or biological consumption. The ice melts, and the surface of the Earth warms up at a crazy rate, from -50 degrees Celsius or -58 degrees Fahrenheit to 50 degrees Celsius, or more than 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists assume that this sudden warming is due to a sudden and massive release of large quantities of gas accumulated under the ice. The planet is freezing itself from the snowball that was imprisoning it. During its fragmentation, the supercontinent Rodinia separated into 2 parts. An ocean was born between the two, Panthalassa. North America moved southwards towards the South Pole. The northern half of Rodinia, under the pressure of the ocean, turned on itself, making its eastern part go up to the north, much more than its western part. Between these 2 parts, a third continental block extends, the Congo Craton. A few million years later, these 3 continents came together to form a new supercontinent called Pannotia, which remained in place until 540 million years ago. The collision gives birth to a mountain chain, the Pan-African orogeny, and welds the various African cratons. This new continental block formed is of remarkable stability, so much so that it will later give birth to Africa. Life is confined to water. Before 600 million years, nothing protects it from the ultraviolet rays emitted by the sun. The molecules of living matter are photosensitive and can be destroyed if they are confronted with certain radiations like ultraviolet rays. Ozone has 3 oxygen atoms. This molecule is formed following several chemical transformations involving nitrogen oxides under the effect of the sun's ultraviolet rays. ozone then accumulates in the stratosphere. For this phenomenon to occur, oxygen must be sufficiently abundant in the atmosphere. It is at this time that the ozone layer begins to form, present at 90% of the current amount. It will reach its totality 200 million years later. Ozone is naturally limited and balanced since it is constantly created and removed by the activity of ultraviolet light and oxygen. It absorbs a large part of the ultraviolet rays and protects living organisms from their harmful effects. With the formation of the ozone layer, marine diversity will explode. The Earth has just suffered climatic catastrophes, but the biosphere is hanging on. As the ice melts, the ocean reappears, and life prepares to reclaim the waters of this new Earth. The deglaciations cause a strong continental erosion, and consequently, an important sedimentation of the littoral zones. The sediments contain various organic matter, emanating from the multiplication of organisms present in the coastal waters. This organic matter is transformed into carbon. The sequestration of CO2 from the atmosphere by the sediments supplies oxygen to the oceans and then to the atmosphere. The living beings have now extraordinary possibilities of diversification. Thus, the famous fauna of world extension, named fauna of Ediacaran, makes appear large, strange animals, still entirely deprived of rigid parts. This fauna is found on all the continents, which means that it is not a question of a regrouping of organisms in only one place subjected to very specific conditions. This fauna developed on the whole surface of the Earth, which represents a great step in the development of life. Ediacarans are among the most intriguing fossil groups ever discovered. They are unlike any other living creature. With a soft body, no mineralized skeleton, they have a padded appearance. They take various forms, going from the round, like the jellyfish, to a radial, triradial, or bilateral symmetry, to that of a disc with a head. The Ediacaran fauna nests on most continents, which is quite rare for organisms living on and in the seafloor. As the Earth is recovering from an ice age, the oceans are still cold at this time, and the climate zones have not yet recovered. Ediacarans measure from a few centimeters to more than 2 meters in length for the largest. They are the first fauna of large organisms to have developed, or at least to have fossilized. Some live under the sands of the seafloor and can move and push themselves when sediment is dumped on them. Others develop tubes connected to their bodies to fill them with sand. The fauna of Ediacaran has about 100 species and a dozen groups and many organizational plans. The main groups include discoid forms, mainly simple flattened discs. They look like jellyfish, but are really quite different since they live in dense populations on the seafloor. The mossonites also have discoid forms. They measure about 12 centimeters or 5 inches in diameter, and their bodies have tubes or pockets filled with sand. The bodies of vendobionts, like Varanger, are bag-shaped with bilateral symmetry. They live buried in the sand. One of the best-known families of the Ediacaran fauna are the Dickinsonids, including Dickinsonia. They have the shape of a small, flat oval disc, and they evolve into a ribbon by widening and flattening. A longitudinal axis divides their ribbon into 2 parts, with thin segments on each side. The Dickinsonia can measure from a few millimeters to 1.40 meters or 5 feet in length. They do not have a digestive system, nor a mouth and anus. They feed by consuming bacterial films that cover the seafloor. Yorgoids and vendobiodes also have segmented and discoid bodies, with one end different from the other. They are able to crawl on the sediments. The Sharnia group have fronds. It is attached to the sedimentary surface and stands on the seafloor. Most of these organisms measure about 10 centimeters, but some reach up to 2 meters. If there are enough of them in close proximity to each other, they form small thickets on the seafloor. The Trilobosarians are a remarkable group of Ediacarans. They have a body with triradial symmetry, including 3 lobes twisted in a spiral, which remains rare in this population. They are discoid and present surprising and unknown details that really differentiate them from other living forms. They are mostly covered with branched radial grooves. Their diameter varies between 0, 3, and 5 centimeters, that is to say, almost 2 inches for the biggest specimens. The Ediacara fauna cannot be mentioned without referring to the microbial mats that cover many sedimentary surfaces. They are at the base of the food chain for some Ediacarans, while others simply filter microorganisms from the seawater. The fauna of Ediacara flourished until 542 million years ago. It represents a first diversification quickly aborted of the pluricellular animals. The cause of its disappearance still remains mysterious today. Several hypotheses are proposed, such as a general disturbance of the environment, a biotic replacement, following the appearance of new species of Cambrian type, or a change of polarity of the Earth's magnetic field, which would have reduced the ozone layer, and thus increased the ultraviolet radiation on the surface of the Earth. Four large continents form the landscape of the Earth, following the breakup of Rodinia. They are located mainly in the southern hemisphere. Laurentia represents the ancient lands of North America and Greenland. Siberia is located east of Laurentia. Baltica, composed of Scandinavia and western Russia, is located southeast of Laurentia. The last continental block, not the least, which stretches from the South Pole beyond the equator, is Gondwana. This last piece includes the ancient terrains of South America, Africa, Australia, India, and Antarctica. The Lapitous Ocean flows through the middle of Baltica and Laurentia. The emerged lands are still uninhabited and without life. They undergo erosion. The sea spreads over shallow depths and covers continental shelves. This creates ideal conditions for life to develop. The metazoans are quite numerous, even if they are not varied, and have a microscopic size between 1 and 5 millimeters. Metazoans are the group of organisms that qualify animals. They are multicellular, since they contain several differentiated cells. Their cells have a nucleus and organelles, such as mitochondria. They feed organically. In parallel with the tectonic events of this period, life begins a profound evolution and a decisive turning point in the evolution of life on Earth. 541 million years ago, it is the Cambrian faunal explosion. Some scientists call it the Big Bang of life. It results in a gigantic renewal of the fauna. New plans of animal organization appear, accompanied by new genera and new species. Nearly half of the current phyla are identified at the beginning of the explosion. The Cambrian fauna is composed of epibenthic animals which live on the seafloor. They are partly burrowers and pelagic and have new ways of feeding. The food chains are more complex than those of the Ediacara fauna. The reasons for this explosion are still debated today, but an interesting hypothesis tends to be validated. a rapid and important slip of the Earth in relation to its axis of rotation would have moved Laurentia and parts of Gondwana from high to low latitudes. This event would have been followed by marine transgressions. The temperate coastlines of the continents and the increase in shallow, submerged continental surfaces would have allowed life to proliferate, and consequently would have led to an exceptional increase in diversity. During this period, which lasted until 485 million years ago, 3 different faunas succeeded each other: the Tomat fauna, the Chengjiang fauna, and the Burgess fauna. The Tomat fauna is characterized by small and very diversified fossils measuring between 1 and 3 millimeters long. They belong to sponges, mollusks, and other annelids. They exhibit calcareous, silicious, or phosphate shells. This fauna represents a major phase in the diversification of multicellular animals with shells and in the mineralization of skeletons. It is considered a key fauna, even if it only lasted a few million years. Like the Ediacaran fauna, the Tomashian fauna is recognized worldwide. It includes some modern-looking organisms, but most are made of tiny blades, needles, caps, tubes, or domes. Called the small shell fauna by paleontologists, it is mostly made up of the beginnings of shells, small scattered fragments. It is not confirmed today that these first fragments of shells would have represented the beginnings of an evolution of animals with shell, or that they would have remained single organisms which disappeared very quickly. The Tomat fauna marks the appearance of a group of organisms belonging to the sponge phylum, the Archaeocyaths. They are the first bioconstructors in association with calcifying microbial organisms to raise organic masses up to 2 meters or 6 feet in height and several meters or feet in diameter on the seafloor. These masses are the pioneers of the complex reef ecosystem that will develop a few million years later. Archaeocyaths consist of a calyx formed by 2 nested porous cones. Their skeletal parts are made of magnesian calcite. They are sessile, benthic, and filter feeders. In order to ensure their feeding, they are found in habitats subjected to a current and a strong turbidity, ensuring them a supply of nutriments. They do not have great capacities of adaptation and have constraints of temperature, salinity of the water, and depth. The fauna of Chengjiang is represented by at least 16 different phyla and about 196 species with a strong predominance, about 40% of arthropods. Vertebrate and invertebrate organisms are present in great variety. These fossils were covered by a layer corresponding to the mud of a warm and shallow sea, which allowed a remarkable preservation of the anatomy of their tissues, whether hard or soft, as well as the elements of their digestive and nervous systems. The groups recorded are extremely varied: sponges, algae, cnidarians, annelids, numerous bilaterians, as well as at least 4 groups of vertebrates. Hycuithus is the first true vertebrate identified as such. It could be classified as the first vertebrate fish, but it does not have all the characteristics to be included in that time, like slimy worms or big arthropods. It has a series of W-shaped muscles called myotomes that are attached to its bones located in the dorsal region. This allows it to propel itself easily and to have better control of its movements. Thanks to the myotomes and the supporting skeleton, its head is different. The skeleton begins to play a protective role in addition to its supporting role. It is made up of bones and not cartilage. Hycuithus has adapted and evolved. With time, also enables him to aspire small preys like worms. Active predator, it is a good swimmer, until today. It is the proof of a very complex and diversified invertebrate fauna. It measures between 4.3 and 7 centimeters, up to 3 inches. Its body is soft and segmented. On its head we count 5 eyes. It has a long and mobile proboscis, like a trunk, attribute exclusively seen on this animal, which makes it an extraordinary creature. This proboscis folds up its mouth and is equipped with prehensile spines being used to catch its prey. It searches the sediments to find its food. Thanks to its lateral lobes, it can survey the seabed and move around, and thanks to its proboscis, it recovers its food in the tunnels dug by worms or bivalves. The Burgess fauna is dated to 505 million years ago. Compared to the 2 other faunas, it constitutes a real explosion, in the literal sense of the term, since it sees the appearance of a quantity of new, complex, and varied organisms. It is the fauna of the Big Bang of life. It was discovered in a site in the Rocky Mountains in Canada. It was found to be in continuity with the Chengjiang fauna and is in very good condition. Burgess remained for a long time the only site giving access to the Cambrian fauna. The fossils were discovered in shales from a marl limestone formation. During sudden underwater avalanches, the organisms were buried under a mud flow. Their good state of preservation is explained by the fact that the mud carried with it all the small creatures on the seafloor. It trapped them where there was neither oxygen to decompose them nor predators to devour them. The extremely fine sediments insinuated themselves everywhere, around and inside the organisms. The small corpses were trapped whole under a sludge that gradually solidified into shale. The Rocky Mountains were formed, and the Earth's convulsions lifted and crumpled large parts of the marine sediments. Some layers were crushed, leaving no sign of life, but one layer remained intact. The places where the fossils of this fauna have been found suggest that these animals live on slopes of accumulated mud at the foot of a large imposing wall, positioned almost vertically. 120 genera make up the Burgess fauna, of which 33 are ordinary organisms belonging to currently known phyla, and which have an exoskeleton. Sponges, brachiopods, trilobites, algae, mollusks, and echinoderms are among them. 87 genera of soft-bodied organisms are also listed. This fauna is very original. Some organisms will not be found in the future geological times. They will mark only the Burgess fauna. At that time, there are 24 fundamental types of organization in arthropods, and only 4 will persist. Arthropods have a segmented body with legs or appendages. This division into segments appears from the embryonic life. A rigid carapace constitutes their exoskeleton, made in most cases of chitin. Thanks to molts, they regularly change their external exoskeleton, which allows them to gain in size, to acquire new organs, or even to change their shape. Arthropods are a worldwide group that can adapt to the different types of environment around them. Several species of arthropods evolved 500 million years ago. Branchiochirus is a kind of arthropod with a bivalve shell that hides 2/3 of its body. It measures between 8 and 9 centimeters long and has a very segmented trunk, at least 40 segments of annular shape. This animal is provided with a pair of small antennas and a pair of clawed appendages. It is an active swimmer and uses its appendages to bring food to its mouth. Marella is a species of arthropod that is part of the soft-bodied fauna. It has a cephalic shield and a body made of about 20 segments. 2 pairs of unirammed appendages decorate its head. Its cephalic shield has a horseshoe shape and is adorned with 2 kinds of horns, curved extensions that run along the body for most of its length. The rest of the body of Marella is thin. This species is able to undulate its body in all directions. Trilobites are among the best-known arthropods. On average, they measure between 2 and 7 centimeters, or about 2 inches, but some individuals were up to 70 centimeters long. That is more than 25 inches long. They are present in abundance on the seafloor and are among the most diversified. There are nearly 19,000 species that have been detailed to date. Their specific anatomy places trilobites in a very special group. Their trilobation is indeed unusual. They have a median lobe and 2 lateral lobes which are protected by an exoskeleton. The trilobites live only in water, and more precisely, on or in the substrate, which constitutes the bottom of the sea. Some forms of trilobites evolve, however, in pelagic, that is to say, that they live and move in a body of water. To this end, their exoskeleton is modified so that the body has more stability, and they also have a better view. Trilobites live in groups. They feed on worms and any other benthic invertebrate. Sydnea measures between 5 and 13 centimeters in length, about 5 inches. Its structure is singular. Its head has only a pair of eyes and a pair of antennas, but they are the first creatures on our planet with advanced eyes. On their so-called compound eyes, each facet has its crystalline lens of calcite oriented to perceive the maximum amount of light possible. In only one eye, 15,000 elements are contained. The trilobites have a practically hemispherical field of vision. The segments of their thorax carry a pair of solid appendices. This carnivorous animal walks on the seafloor in search of food, mainly small trilobites and hyoliths. The trilobites will spread in the ocean and divide into a large number of species. Among the phylum of annelids, one animal stands out for its unusual structure. It is Hallucigenia. With a long and slender body like that of a worm, the animal has 7 pairs of tentacles that end in claws on one side and join spines on the other. It moves on its tentacles, and its spines are erected on its back. The 3 pairs of fine tentacles at the level of its head are used to sort out its food and to orient itself like antennas. Sponges also adorn the Cambrian seabed. These animals are equipped with an aquifer system that allows the circulation of water. Sponges are adorned with 2 layers of cells. On the outside, the pinacoderm, and on the inside, the choanoderm. In the middle of the 2 layers, mobile cells circulate in a cellular matrix, mainly composed of collagen. Sponges adapt to fresh or marine waters. They can settle up to 5,000 meters deep. They are great consumers of bacteria, organic debris, and algae. They feed by filtering the water. The water, which is filled with particles, enters through the pores of the sponge. Large particles are absorbed, organic particles are digested, and inorganic particles are rejected through the pores. Sponges are very strong. Even if they are crushed or torn off, their cells reassemble and regenerate. They are also resistant to changes in acidity and survive during climatic warming and ocean acidification. Echinoderms are a very diverse group of marine animals that have the particularity of having a central symmetry and a star shape, called pentaradial. They have a skeleton made of bony plates and have a water system like sponges. To function, the body of echinoderms uses hydrostatic principles. Their feet are like small extensions provided with suction cups, maintained inflated by the pressure of water. The water circuit necessary to the functioning of this system is independent. The water enters through a hole drilled in a ring around the mouth, and it spreads throughout the body through internal channels. One of the most widespread species of echinoderms is the sea lily. In its flowering stem form, the sea lily has a three-part body, a root system with spikes that allows it to attach to the seafloor, a stem that can be up to 1.50 meters or 5 feet long, with a base that is stiffer than the top, and a calyx covering the vital organs topped by a dozen mobile, feathery-looking arms. To feed, the sea lily spreads its arms and captures planktonic particles. The sea lily is spared by predators because most of its body is calcified. It is able to regenerate itself. It lives in shallow waters attached to hard bottoms, such as clusters of shells. The last of the Burgess fauna that we will talk about are the brachiopods. They are present in great numbers and in a very diversified way. Their shell is composed of two valves, a ventral valve and a dorsal valve. Inside, there is a brachial skeleton from which filaments spring up that capture plankton and lead it to the mouth. Brachiopods live attached to their substrate. There are 12,000 species of brachiopods at this time, including Lingulella. Buried in the sand and mud of estuaries, this species looks like a long worm, with two horny valves at one end. Its structure is complex. Its tentacles are covered with vibrating cilia that cause water currents. These cilia are loaded with food particles, which are then led to the mouth. The tentacles have another important function. They absorb oxygen and act as gills to allow the animal to breathe. The valves protect the tissues and concentrate the water currents. Over the next 100 million years, brachiopods improved their valves considerably. All these elements of the ecosystem are in balance with each other, but future events will disrupt their peaceful life. It is now 485 million years ago, and life is about to emerge. The area around a volcano after an eruption is among the most barren of lands. The black lava flows that previously rolled down the flanks are now frozen. Steam flies between the blocks and yellow sulfur, encrusting the mouths of the chimneys. Further away, everything is quiet. However, the continents are not immobile. They continue to drift, animated by the convection currents of the Earth's mantle. The continental surface is empty, like a great desert. No bushes to protect from the wind, nor greenery to brighten up the black surface of the ashes. Although the evolution of the Earth has allowed the development of life in the ocean, the dry land remains barren. Plants resembling lichens and our current mosses begin to settle on land. These first colonizers reach the rocks and cling to all their irregularities. They then develop spikes. The water not yet circulating in their tissue, they let themselves dry out until rains fall and they rehydrate completely. Other plants resist drying out by developing an impermeable cuticle that reduces water loss through openings that allow gas exchange. For the moment, these plants have no leaves. They are lying or standing. They colonize in abundance the aerial and mineral environment and provide microorganisms with a raw material that will lead to the formation of the first vegetable soils. A wide variety of organisms can now try their hand at these new conditions. This conquest of a new environment is only the beginning of a large colonization which will radically change the aspect of the Earth. But our journey stops here for today. Are you curious to discover what the Earth looked like 480 million years ago? See you in the next video.